Welcome back. A high-profile name in Missouri politics announced he's ending his campaign and leaving politics. State Senator Caleb Rowden, who has represented the Columbia area for nearly 12 years, announced this morning he's no longer running for Secretary of State.
Our Missouri Capitol Bureau Chief Joe McLean has more on the announcement and why Rowden says he's bowing out.
Senator Rowden was arguably in the best position to be elected the next Secretary of State of Missouri. He had the most money raised, and he had more than a decade of legislative accomplishments to campaign on. Still, he says politics has changed since he started in it, and that he's confident in his decision to step away. In a social media post on Monday, the Missouri Senate's top Republican said he plans to dedicate more time to his family and that politics has evolved over time for the worse. Quote, while there have always been deep political and philosophical disagreements about how to get to a desired outcome, the desired outcome and the facts used to make decisions used to be shared values. More and more, the latter no longer seems to be the case. Consensus building was once a trait that was admired and rewarded. That no longer seems to be the case. In his statement, Rowden added that he's not sure when the toxic political shift started, nor when it will shift back. An escalating rift with a small faction of GOP senators called the Freedom Caucus boiled over early in the 2024 session.
The beginning of the 2024 legislative session in the Senate has been nothing short of an embarrassment. A chamber designed to be occupied with civil, principled statesmen and women have been overtaken by a small group of swamp creatures who all too often remind me more of my children than my colleagues.
The Freedom Caucus's antics led Rowden to strip some of its members of their committee positions and take other actions like moving the parking spaces of key members. A handful of local Republican chapters released memos calling for Rowden's resignation over that move. Rowden's exit mirrors those of many national Republicans, including Congressman Ken Buck of Colorado and Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. Both have announced resignations, saying they face internal backlash or can't take the toxic dysfunction and extremism. Rowden's exit leaves 4 other Republicans and 2 Democrats in the race for Secretary of State. Candidates have until Tuesday to file for office. In Jefferson City, Joe McLean, WGEM News.